All right, welcome to the presentation that I didn't intend to make for this conference. My plan for this conference was to make a different presentation. My intended presentation was similar theme, but it wasn't about the star point method because I hadn't invented it yet. I came up with this method while I was writing a presentation discussing other plotting methods, and I was like, well, here we are, follow the dopamine, and I did. So I have created this method. The intention here is having a method of story structure that will work both for people who like to plot and for people who hate plotting and prefer not to do too much planning. So this is adaptable for both types of folks. What we're going to cover here is we're going to talk a little bit about story structure, how to use the star point method, and some software that may be helpful for you that I personally am a big fan of. So let us get into this. Story structure. If you don't know, which I suspect most of you do, but story structure is the pattern of rising and falling tension through a story. That is all it is. And there are multiple different structures, but that is essentially what story structure is in the bag, and fortunately is almost universal. So, story structure, as I just mentioned, is a pattern of rising and falling action and is mostly universal. I say mostly because there are certain indigenous storytelling types that don't use this structure, and that's fine. I'm not here to try and sanitize anything, but the majority of story structures out there pretty much follow this rough pattern of rising and falling action. And it is commonly recognized like the 3-act structure and the 5-act structure and the 12-act and so on are all following the same thing. It just breaks up this pattern a little differently, but ultimately it is almost exactly the same if you look at them all kind of overlaid onto each other where they're talking about raising tension and lowering tension. So that is absolutely a thing. Being autistic, I saw this pattern and I was like, okay, well, this is the shape. And whether the 3-act structure, 5-act structure, or all of these other possible structures made sense for you, that is pretty much all the same thing, just explained differently. Most story structures and crafting rely on this same pattern of tension and have for a very long time, and will continue to do so into the future because it's how human brains usually grasp story. And this pattern of tension is going to work for you through all genres of fiction. It doesn't look the same in nonfiction. So this is about fiction, but nonfiction is its own creature. However, creative nonfiction will follow this shape of story pretty much. That is a reality. So if you're going to tell a story, this pattern more or less takes people through it. And as you can see here, there are 5 points I have plotted along it. Now, various different genre story structures will have more or fewer or different points plotted on this, and the shape will look a little different, but ultimately they are roughly the same when you examine them closely. What are the 5 points? The 5 points are the opening, the catalyst, the midpoint, the finale, and the ending. Those are the 5 points. I'm going to get into each of them in depth, but I wanted to give you a quick view of what the 5 points are. Okay, so the opening is where your characters start before their world changes. This is before the thing that draws them into the story. This is how we introduce our characters, even if it's done in media res, in the middle of action. My cats are going crazy in the background, and I apologize. It is the introduction of the setting. It's where we learn about things before the changes happen. This is not always extremely long. It can stretch for a chapter, a few paragraphs. It could be a couple chapters. The exact length of time is not specific. For me, the opening of my first novel, Fallen, is 3 chapters long, and my chapters are about 1,500 words. So that just gives you an idea. It doesn't have to be like a paragraph, but different genres have different lengths of opening too. The catalyst. This is the thing that throws the character into the story. It's the thing that puts all the gears into motion. This is Frodo Baggins deciding to, fine, he's going to go with Gandalf and leaving the Shire. This is, him deciding that this ring has to be taken to Rivendell to be, dealt with by the elves. This is all of those pieces. Like, this is that moment when the story actually begins. The catalyst also includes the character's response to that event. Do they immediately jump on it, or do they have to be dragged kicking and screaming into the story? That happens sometimes, and I won't pretend it doesn't. But the character does have to eventually engage with the story, whether it's voluntarily or not. Then it kind of shows the event that's going to change the character's world, so we're taking the world of the opening and changing it into what the world of the story is going to be, and kind of showing where this is going. In the 3-act structure, this is actually the beginning of Act 2. Just to give you a little point of reference. You will also see that the catalyst is, I believe, the end of Act 1 / into the beginning of Act 2 in like the beat sheet, and other things like the catalyst is the thing that begins Act 2. Then you have the midpoint. This is typically, for obvious reasons, usually around the center of the story, word count-wise. This is the middle of the story. And I don't mean like the middle section, I mean the actual middle point. At that point, the tension is going to be the highest that it is through the entire story. People think the finale is actually peak tension. It is not. It is the midpoint. This is the point where dominoes are going to be set up to fall. And at this point, tension is going to be at fever pitch. This is going to be the they will of the will they won't they. And the characters just get together, but something bad is going to happen and they're going to have a fight. I'm going to explain that a little bit later. Or it could be the heist that the characters are going on if you're writing a heist book. This is them going into that heist and like everything that leads up to the moment of either they're getting caught or something goes wrong. That is what this midpoint is. Everything is either great or awful. But whether it's great or awful, it's kind of teetering on this precipice where everything is going to get bad. Or if it is bad, it's going to get worse. So that is something to be aware of regarding the midpoint. That is why I say it's peak tension. It is at that, it's that moment before the roller coaster drop. That's what it should feel like for your readers, and that's what it should feel like for you, is the moment before the roller coaster, like the big hill. And that is essentially that second before the collapse. And after the midpoint, of course, everything does go to hell. That is a reality for the characters at this point, and if it doesn't go to hell, well, it should. Between the midpoint and the finale, you're going to have a lot of bad things happen. There's going to be, to use the beat sheet, there's the Dark Night of the Soul, there's all this other stuff that goes in there. After everything goes straight to hell, the finale is when hope returns. It is that moment when everybody rallies. If we're looking at the Avengers movies, Endgame, it's that moment when all the portals start opening on the battlefield and all the characters come pouring through in the final confrontation with Thanos. That is the finale. If you look at that story structure I showed at the beginning, the finale is actually lower in tension than the midpoint. Not much, but a little bit. Because the midpoint is the moment where all of these dominoes start falling. The finale is one of the final dominoes. And this finale could be the conflict, like the solution is presenting itself to the main characters. They are engaged in battle with the big bad. It could be all sort, or they're jailbreaking if they got caught in the heist. This is the execution of the plan, the big showdown against the antagonist, whether the antagonist is a human being, a concept, the weather. There are so many different antagonists that one can have in the story that are not a person, but that is really the finale, is that big showdown with the big bad, whoever the big bad is, even if the big bad is your own psychological demons. And then finally, we have the ending. The ending is the resolution of the primary plot. In a series, secondary plots may well not be resolved. If you're writing a standalone, everything should be resolved, if possible. At least within reason. It should feel satisfying. And tension has returned to baseline. It has dropped. It may be a little bit higher than the beginning if you are writing a series and you have more stories, so you're not wrapping everything up neatly. But tension should have returned to roughly baseline equal to the beginning. This does exclude leaving characters on cliffhangers. Now, I am not a fan of cliffhangers at all. I hate them. In fact, I don't like them as writing. I feel like most of the time they're lazy because the writer doesn't know how to finish a book. I also feel frequently like cliffhangers are like not finishing the act. You know, if you walk out of a moment of intimacy and your partner's not satisfied, that's what a cliffhanger is. It is not a pleasant experience, partially because in writing, unlike TV, where you know you're getting an episode next week, in writing it might be a year, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years before the writer comes up with the next book. Leaving your readers on a cliffhanger, unless you're doing a rapid release and have the next book written, is an awfully mean thing to do. And it can be incredibly unsatisfying, because by the time you finished your book, the reader might well have been like, I'm not waiting for this, and gotten pissed off and found something else to read. So that is a reality you might run into if you use cliffhangers. If you are rapid releasing, and you do have the next book written, I'm sorry, my cat is causing havoc again. If you are rapid releasing, and you do have a plan for the next book, and it's coming out quickly. For example, Jim Butcher did this with the most recent 2 books he released in the Harry Dresden series. There was a cliffhanger between them, but the next one came out like 3 months after the first one, I think maybe even less time. It was very, very quick. So that cliffhanger was there and kept you in the middle of it and really like tense, but the resolution was right there on the horizon. Akanksha asked, how do you feel about endings that are, this sucks right now, we might fail, we will probably fail, but we're still going to do the thing? So long as the primary plot is mostly resolved, that's okay. Because we're talking about, like, if that's leading into future books in a series, okay, but if the primary plot is left unresolved, that's kind of what I'm talking about with the cliffhanger. Or if, for example, at the end of, I forget which Dresden book it is, and spoiler alert if you are not having read the Dresden books, but this book has been out for a really long time. At the end of one of the Dresden books, Harry Dresden gets shot in the head, and, he gets shot in the chest, and you think he's dead. Of course, he can't be dead because the books are written in first person past tense, but we're gonna just kind of skate over that reality. And you think he's dead. The primary plot of that book had closed. Like, the main arc of the story had ended, and Jim decided that he was feeling... He chose violence that day and ended the book that way. And exactly, as Mama Maggie said, there's so many series or episodic things that don't get finished, and so you leave readers forever sitting on pins and needles. And so that's why I say it's really mean. I'm not a fan of those. But that is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit. So the ending should also kind of be a reflection to show how different things are now than they were when the characters began. So it should create this kind of dichotomy, this balance. Here's the beginning, here's the end, here's how the end is different from the beginning. You don't have to like lay it out exactly that obviously, but that is essentially the function of the end. Do time jumps complicate the structure? No. It shouldn't matter what timeline you're following. The pattern of rising and falling tension should be the same. It should follow the same pattern. Because if you are if this model were 3D and you're pulling the midpoint into the beginning before all of this happens, you're going to lose readers, because if you have the peak tension at the first chapter, for example, it's all going to ramp downhill from there in tension. And it's going to be boring. People aren't going to stay, because the thing that keeps readers turning pages, the things that makes books unputdownable, which is the number one thing I've heard about my novel Fallen, is that people couldn't put it down once they started reading it. is keeping that tension and like ratcheting it up. And that's the thing. You have to keep a constant flow of tension in the story and keep, picking it up until the midpoint, and then you can kind of release that tension and let the roller coaster do its thing. All right, the next slide. So, I promised you a method. I'm calling it the star point method. I developed this probably 3 days ago. So, if it's a little rough, that's why. I developed it as I was writing this. The star point method is pretty simple and also visually demonstrates the patterns of rising tension, because as you can see, the midpoint is the top of the star. It is the point of highest tension in the story. So you have the opening, the catalyst, the midpoint, the finale, and the closing. The catalyst and finale do not need to be equal in tension, but I didn't want to create a lopsided star because that angered my brain. So, that is absolutely a thing, but you will see here the pattern of rising and falling tension. Those are the 5 points. And if you plan nothing else in your novel, if you know nothing else about your story, you should at least consider what these 5 points in your story looks like if you write nothing more than a sentence about each of these things. If you're not into planning, this will help you create that pattern and know what your next goal is. That's one of the things that pantsers or discovery writers run into, is they don't know what their next goal is. And if you don't know what your next goal is, you don't know where you're going. I always talk about planning your novel a little bit like planning a road trip. If I don't know where the road trip is ending, there's a good chance I'm going to just hop on a highway and drive a random direction and not actually get anywhere. The way I plan my road trips, some people like to plan every single point of their road trip and don't deviate from it. Other people plan, okay, well, I'm going to, let's say I'm going to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to plan to get there, and this is about how long the drive is, so I'm going to schedule a hotel here in the middle so I can sleep overnight. And I am going to leave myself time, because we all know I'm going to pull off the highway to see the world's biggest ear of corn, because I'm going to. That's just how it is. So some people don't like to plan every step of the schedule. Some people find it easier to plan every moment of their trip. There is no wrong way to do that. But so long as your plan, whether you have a significant one or not, includes at least a little bit of these 5 pieces, you are probably going to be able to get to where you're going. And if this is too many pieces for you, and you're like, I don't want to plan all that, if you plan nothing else, plan the opening, the midpoint, and the closing. So this visual is to show that. And yes, you can definitely mark the tourist oddities. Like, there's so many ways you can go around planning the road trip that is your book. So, how to use this method? How is this going to work for you? Consider the beginning. Now, I created this flow pattern, kind of like, it sort of starts at the end and folds into the beginning. You'll see the pattern. Consider the beginning and end of your story. Where do you want your characters to start? Where do you want your characters to end? For example, 2 characters are going to fall in love. You're writing a romance. You know those 2 characters are going to fall in love and have a happily ever after. That is it. Cool. You know that they're not going to start together. If you know anything about your characters, you're going to recognize that they may be in different, places. You'll want to think about your characters. This is about the plot, not about planning your characters or your setting. Those are separate beasties. So if you know your characters, start planning your story. If you don't know your characters yet, you might struggle with story planning. So start where your characters are. Okay, so I'm just going to grab a random Hallmark story. So small town, woman moves back to her hometown after not making it in the big city for whatever reason, meets small town, maybe she reconnects with her best friend. And so those are the 2 characters, and at the end of the book, they're going to be in love. Once you have those points, you can look at the catalyst and the finale. Okay, so what's the catalyst for their relationship? Well, the catalyst for them kind of rekindling their feelings he falls off a bridge and she's a person who swims to say a lifeguard. There we go. And he ends up in the river and she pulls him out of the river and saves him. And the finale is they go whitewater rafting and she has to save him again. I don't know. This is not a great story. Please don't write this book. And then at the midpoint, so you'd have the characters meet for the first time, the meet cute or the catalyst. I think the meet cute is usually before the catalyst, but still the meet cute is around that time period. And then the finale is they're going to overcome their differences and decide to make the relationship work. You know, Samantha, if you want to write this book, I salute you. And then the midpoint, the characters have some kind of terrible fight and walk away trying to decide if they want to be with each other at all. So maybe she finds out that he's been texting his ex, and she's misunderstanding that he's texting his ex because they are friends, but it didn't work out because his ex is actually a lesbian. And so there's miscommunication here. But they have this massive fight, and they walk away trying to decide if they want to be together at all. And that's the midpoint. That's that highest point of tension. They've kind of been circling this wanting to have a relationship, and then they have this big falling apart. That is how you use this method. You plan it from the outsides into the middle. And doing that gives you kind of the points of the star and allows you to plan your points of tension. Because if you don't know the beginning and ending, figuring out the middle is going to be awfully difficult because you don't know what the peak moment of tension between the beginning and end is if you don't have those pieces planned. So if you aren't planning the catalysts, if you're deleting step 2 entirely, you need to plan your beginning, like know where you're starting, know what you want the end of your story to be, and I'm gesturing on my desk like you can see it. You have to plan your start, you have to plan your end, and between the two, you have to create this kind of pyramid shape. Okay, so what's the moment that's going to be the highest tension between the beginning and end? Now, this is, of course, recognizing that no outline survives first contact with the writing process. It's going to change. I'm writing the third book in my series right now. I've finished writing it and I'm editing it. And in the middle of writing it, my character decided, I'm going to buy a boat. And I'm going to live on this boat for the rest of the series. And that was not what I intended her to do. She wasn't supposed to buy a boat. She wasn't supposed to learn how to sail. She wasn't supposed to do any of that. I'd intended on her paying somebody, but no, she's like, nope, I'm going to live on this boat and it's going to be my boat. So recognize that your plans may well have to change because your characters come up with ideas. Zabrine asks, I have an A plot and a B plot going on at the same time. Right now I have a pretty good idea of what happens in the A plot, but no ideas for what happens in B. I know it's significant. Does that make a difference, having to interweave the two plot streams? It certainly ratchets up the complexity of your storytelling a little bit. It certainly does, change it, but it shouldn't change the pattern of rising and falling tension. The B plot should kind of mirror the A plot a little bit in the shape of the tension, because the midpoint should be the highest tension of the book, unless the B plot starts at the midpoint and continues out. So you're going to want to think about where it fits into that and how you're going to resolve it. If the B plot is something you're going to resolve in future books, well, you don't need to have the tension gone because you want readers to have a reason to buy book 2. So you can definitely work that, but it doesn't change the overall shape of rising and falling tension, and it shouldn't. Okay, I think I have... Yes, okay, so notes here. While I advise doing that kind of outside folding in method to plan your points, there's no wrong order. You can plan them in whatever order you want. If you find this method too sparse or even too strict, you can remove points because, as I've said before, there are many shapes of a star. You can always add pieces. When I'm planning a story, I personally like the beat sheet. It allows me to plan things in a method that works for my brain and has enough beats so that I can just kind of write between them like playing connect the dots. But you can add or remove pieces to this, and you could use this concept in conjunction with other story creation methods like the beat sheet or the snowflake method or any of the other methods out there. All of those will work. And yeah, you are definitely going to have your characters go wandering off the plot that you have planned so nicely for them and have to rework things. That is an inevitability, whether you plan things out well in advance or whether you don't plan them at all. And if you don't plan them at all, I mean, I guess you're not going to have them leave the plan, but at the same time, you will discover that it's not going the way you expected. That is one of the fun pieces of writing. So you can add or remove points if you find things too strict or too loose. If you don't want to plan things out, at least knowing what the next point is going to be. Even if you don't know what's going to happen at that point, knowing, okay, the next thing that I've written my beginning, the next thing I need to work toward is the catalyst. Even if you don't know what the catalyst is, knowing that that is the next thing you're going to work on will help you write forward and not get stuck. Because one of the things that happens to discovery writers is they get stuck because they don't know what the next pattern of tension is. What's the next piece that I need? What's the next direction I need to go? That is part of the process of discovering as you're writing, of course. But if you know, okay, so I've written the beginning and I've written my catalyst, the characters are in the story, I need to raise the tension up to I need to find a way to keep raising tension up to the midpoint, that tipping point there. So I'm going to write things that are going to support that pattern of tension. Being neurodivergents, we like patterns. So if you don't plan out what your points are, you can still use this method. There is nothing stopping you. Even if all you do is know, I need to write the catalyst next. It's all you need. The point of this is to provide a simple framework for people. So you can modify this, you can change it, you can suit it to yourself, but the entire intention here is to create a concept of storycraft that you can use as your guiding star. I had considered calling this the guiding star method, but the star point method seems to win out when I workshopped the idea with people. So those are the notes I have on it. And finally, I have some helpful software for folks, in case you don't know them. The software that I recommend for writers, Plotter is your friend. If you're a discovery writer, you might find Plotter not your thing, but I absolutely love it. And one of the nice things about Plotter is you can export your structure from Plotter into Scrivener, and they play nice together. I don't use Scrivener, but I have friends who do, and they swear by this. So Plotter, if you are a planning type of person, even if you're just using this method, and I did submit a user-created template to Plotter, so hopefully the star point method will be making its way into Plotter for you to use. It is a phenomenal tool. I'm actually using it right now to plan my newsletters because I can plan out each chapter is a different newsletter, and I'm planning out the elements of it's great. It's useful for more than just story structure. It is useful for a lot of things. You just have to kind of think sideways at it. The next one I suggest is YWriter. If you are broke and don't want to use one of like OpenOffice or LibreOffice to draft your book in, YWriter is excellent. I love it. It has pretty much all of the functions that Scrivener does. And it looks a little different, but it has pretty much all of the same functions, except it doesn't have all of the integrations. That's what you're missing with YWriter between that and Scrivener. But it does have text-to-speech. It's not enjoyable, but it will read your book to you. You can set up cards for characters and locations and notes and all sorts of stuff. It is really useful software to help you organize your writing. Pardon me. QualWriter is a similar writing software to YWriter. It is a lot of fun. It also has built-in writing prompts to help you kind of like get some exercises done and practice things. There's also a built-in beta reading group sort of thing. It's really cool. QualWriter also is more aesthetically pleasing than YWriter and allows you to lay out your notes more like a corkboard in Scrivener style versus YWriter, which keeps them all in like menus. So that is another option. Then, of course, there's Scrivener, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, but it is the writing software for writers, for authors. It is considered like the Mac Daddy. I used it, it wasn't for me, but I respect its place, and its integrations are excellent, and I have nothing bad to say about it, it just wasn't my writing software. And finally, we have our old standby MS Word. Regardless of what program I write in, I edit in MS Word because I can do tracked changes and comments, and I have plugins like Perfect It and Smart Edit that make my life easier. So, and MS Word, it will export a much cleaner document. Like, I've noticed there are formatting gremlins with Scrivener. Sometimes the straight and curly quotes get a little weird when you export from Scrivener. I haven't had that happen with YWriter. With YWriter, they're all straight quotes, and I can just global change and replace. Scrivener sometimes gets funky. But MS Word is, of course, the one that will produce a clean, well-formatted document with, like, headings and subheadings and text styles and all of that stuff. Like, text styles, when you're doing formatting, are really, really important. So using MS Word for your final pass is, of course, the one you want to go with. LibreOffice and OpenOffice, both of which are free. They are open source software. Also have most of the same features as MS Word, but they do tend to be a little bit glitchier. In my experience, I've had some issues with comments going funky between MS Word and LibreOffice or OpenOffice. I've had, like, some weirdness happen. They are, however, perfectly valid software. I have gone over time by 2 minutes. Are there any questions before we wrap up here? Am I over time? I think I'm over time. What time is it? What time are we going to? I'm going till noon. Excellent. We have a few minutes for questions. Does anybody... Yeah, Plotter is amazing. If actually I can show you how Plotter works, since we have the time, I can... I will show you the Plotter. Let me close it. No, it is not. Though your plotting may be hairy. Give me just a moment here. I will screen share Plotter as soon as it loads. Okay. I'm sharing you my whole screen because Plotter will open up sub-windows and it'll get funny. Let's see. Monty asked, if you have an idea of the end of the series and you know it has to be a series, how do you figure out how to split it up? Depends on how many books you want to write. I have a series of like 20 plus books that I'm working on right now because I made poor life choices, or excellent life choices, I guess. How to split it up is going to be more specific than I can give you guidance on in this minute. But that is really, like, there are ways to do it. You're just going to have to figure out how many books you want to write, which stories you want to tell, and how you want to tell them. Like, that's a very specific thing. Okay, so Plotter. Now that I am showing over here, I'm going to double check. Yes, I'm still recording. Excellent. So this is what the series view looks like. As you can see, I have a project. These are books in my Boston Blight series. These are the two I've already written. I'm going to just warn you, there are some spoilers in what I'm about to show you, so sorry. Fallen has been out for a year. So the way I used this, I did not plan Fallen in Plotter. I wrote Fallen before I had Plotter. But the way I'm using Plotter is I used it, as you can see all the chapters here, I kept track of major events in each chapter so that I know where to go to look for any particular event, and I have my timeline down here at the bottom. So, year 1, late summer. So I know what time things happen in the story, because my stories are going to be written at various points. So Always Winter here happens kind of between these, like, it happens sort of at the same time as this book here. This is the book that I'm working on. So, you can, and also you can look at it as a series timeline. If I want to, here, hold on. Series view, timeline. I'm using this timeline to plan out the whole series as it's going to happen. I'm not going to let you stare at that too long because, no. But you can use it to plan out the whole series and which characters have what happen in which book at which time. Very, very helpful. and you can see, you can check out the different views. Glass Houses is the book my husband is working on. Always Winter is the third book that I am working on. And using this to lay things out in a visual manner is extremely helpful. So I actually put in all of the major events with the published books so I can go back and refer to them. It also lets you have character profiles with art. You can have location profiles, again, with photos. And you can set this up, and then you have notes, which I'm using to keep, you can see species here, factions, and so on, using it to keep all of that straight, and then the outline view lets you view all sorts of things. So there are a lot of excellent views. Plotter is amazing. Yes, you can share your timeline with your editor if you want to, though they will have to have Plotter unless you export it. That is a thing. So it is an amazing tool, and let me just pull up how I'm using it to structure my newsletters so I can show you that it can be done in a different way. I'm going to close that. There we go. So over here, this is my newsletter, how I'm structuring it. So my March newsletter, I put it out on the 15th. There's the theme. Here's my like these are all the sections I have. So updates, why spring is going to matter to me. A character focus, I'm going to have some character art, talk a little bit about the character, and then an article for the writers, and then I'm going to kind of alternate how I do this through time. It's amazing. How does it export? You can export it to, let's take a look. Let's see. Export. MS Word, Scrivener, or other method. So I can export it to a docx, and I will show you what it looks like. Let's just export it to my desktop. And I will pull it up and show you. If I can find it, because my desktop has an awful lot of files on it. My bad. What did I name it? I'm not sure what I named it, so this might get interesting for a minute. There it is. Word takes a second to load for me because of the plugins I have. It takes time. So I'm telling it to open, but we'll see if it's going to take a minute here. Particularly since I'm running recording software, so this might take a second. OneNote is an excellent option for series Bibles. I love it. And yeah, I have no problems showing stuff. Like, I kind of like skip through some of the spoilery things because I would like people to read my books, but so there's that. But yeah, the visual in this, like, I have nothing but amazing things to say about Plotter. Okay, here's how it sent the outline. So March, it gives you headers. So if you view your navigation pane, you can navigate to these headers and subheaders. So March, here's the theme, it gives you the timelines, and it'll export to something that looks like that. I don't use Grammarly. I don't like Grammarly very much, but yeah, I'm not into this outline, but if I wanted to share it with somebody so they could see it and they don't have Plotter, this would be a way to share it with other people. So if you're sharing your series outline with your editor, say, as was suggested, you can export it and you can send this to your editor, who will then be able to read it. This is not intended to be a big expose on Plotter, though, but that is just a brief review of it. Let's see. And yeah, I'm glad to demo it. I mean, they're not paying me, but I just love the software that much. All right, so are there any questions before we end here? Yeah, Grammarly I don't use. I use Smart Edit and Perfect It. Smart Edit for authors might be a really useful tool. I love it. It allows you to track things like adverbs, passive voice, other stuff that Grammarly and Hemingway and some of the others do, but I just like Smart Edit better because I can use it as a plugin in Word and just do it, and Grammarly is sketchy sometimes. Smart Edit, I will, talk to me afterwards. I will share to you the wonders of Smart Edit. Yes, Plotter is phenomenal, Lori. I love it. I have nothing but amazing like feelings about Plotter. Last 5 minutes. Are there any questions about anything I talked about the star point method, about, I mean, I could probably do a lecture on Plotter alone, but are there any questions about the star point method or story structure that I covered here? And yes, I'm sorry my background is, I've got cans on the floor, I'm aware of that. All of my spoons went to conference planning, so I didn't get my recycling taken out like I should have. Will I be sharing the deck? Which deck? I know you're not judging me, and we're neurodivergent here, so you understand not having all the spoons. That is one of the reasons why I'm doing this conference in my PJ pants, because I knew all of you would understand. Yep, pile of dishes. Oh yes, I will be sharing the PowerPoint presentation. All of the PowerPoint presentations for all the presenters are going to be sent out in a digest afterwards, and for anybody watching on YouTube, there will be a link to them underneath the YouTube channel in the description. Yeah, well, you wouldn't have noticed the PJ pants because you can only see me down to here. I did that on purpose. All right, well, we will wrap it up here then. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your ideas, your time, and I'm really excited to talk to you out in the lobby and get to know all of you through the course of the conference. I really appreciate everybody, and I will continue chatting with folks outside.